to provide the care. So what happens to resolutions? This is something that I think is poorly understood by folks outside of the group who actually attend the leadership conference. And so it's worth spending a minute on this. There's a little more later on as well. Resolutions submitted to the AAP are voted on at the AAP Annual Leadership Conference each summer. That occurs typically in late July or early August at AAP headquarters. That leadership conference is attended by a specific subset of Academy leaders, so chapter, committee, section, and council leadership, as well as the board of the Academy itself, and the executive directors do attend, however, they are not voting members. So for example, as a chapter president, I attend leadership conference and can vote in that capacity. As a member of the chapter forum management committee, I would not vote or speak on behalf or submit resolutions in that capacity. All adopted resolutions are referred to the appropriate AAP entity for a response. So for example, if there is a resolution about eliminating sugar sweetened beverages from WIC that tends to make its way to the leadership conference every year. If that resolution is being, or any other is being discussed and debated on the resolution floor at the leadership conference, there will be a vote, which requires a simple majority. And as a result of that, the resolution is either adopted or not adopted. An adopted resolution, so in the case of the WIC one, for example, might be referred to the Committee on Nutrition or to the entities within the AAP that address nutrition or school health, depending on kind of the context. So that's kind of what would happen if your resolution. So it's very important when you think of your idea to kind of have a sense in mind of who would be the interested parties within the Academy from a policy or operations standpoint that would sort of take up what you're asking the Academy to do. And we'll get a little bit into a subsequent slide on research, but that's part of it, making sure that what you're asking hasn't already been done. All responses from those entities, so whichever, the example here is Committee on Medical Education, as a program director, that's a relevant one for me. They will kind of review the resolutions that are sent to them that are adopted. They will draft responses. And then those responses are reviewed by the Academy Board of Directors before being sent back out to the CFMC reps, so folks like me, to then disseminate to individual authors. Resolutions are advisory and not binding. And this is another one that may differ a little bit from some of the other professional societies and is something that many authors are confused about. So even if your resolution is adopted, it is advisory to the Academy and to the board. It is not binding. So for example, you could have a very popular resolution that asks that, and in fact, there was one a couple years ago, that the Academy create an international center of excellence in child health. It was very sort of like there was a lot of enthusiasm behind that discussion, but you could imagine from a feasibility and a finance standpoint, creating an international center of excellence in fill in the blank might not be something that is actually practical. And so that's a great example. If you're asking for you're literally, pardon the expression, asking for the moon, it could be popular enough to be sort of adopted by a majority of voting leaders, but not something that in practicality can be implemented. So again, thinking about your ask in resolutions being thoughtful and strategic, that what you are asking for is something that's not only within the Academy's scope, but also feasible. And if you don't know what's feasible, that's okay. So the idea is not to limit yourself, but just to be a little bit practical. So talking a little bit about, just to give you guys some examples. So our district, California, is one of the largest districts in the country. Most districts are composed of a bunch of different states, but because California is one of the most populous states, we have 4 different chapters of the AAP within our state. We come together as this district. We tend to be one of the most prolific submitters of resolutions in the entire country. So last year there were just about 60 resolutions at Leadership Conference. And you can see on the slide here, I think I counted these, it's like 24 had one or more authors from our district of California. So this is not, you guys, we can send out these slides after the fact if you'd like to have them. This is just meant to kind of show you a little bit all the different resolutions that came from our very robust and very participatory district. And you can see the majority of those were adopted. The amendments typically happen after submission at the point of debate. So I won't get into that a lot today. Other than to say, in just like once submitted to the Academy the resolution, the resolution, if adopted, is advisory, not binding. It is also the property of the Academy. The second that you hit the submit button in the online submission form, that resolution becomes the property of the Academy. And so typically those amendments occur post hoc in the context of debate. You can see, so every year there are however many resolutions. Typically it's somewhere between about 50 to 65 that are brought before the Academy at the leadership conference. After the voting is concluded, there is a separate vote to rank the top 10. So really to kind of say, these are, out of all the things that we agreed we wanted to adopt, these are the things that are the most important to, again, the voting members of the leadership conference, the folks who are, by virtue of their role, so that's leadership in chapters, councils, committees, and sections, who are able to vote. These are the things that are most important. So this is last year's top 10. You can see in bold, those are top 10 resolutions that were authored either in part or in whole by authors from our district. So 5 of the top 10 came from our district last year. The number 1 resolution being supporting providers in areas where EDI is banned or in the process of being banned. I imagine that has not certainly become less relevant in light of the last few weeks. But again, thinking of things that have been submitted in the past. So just to give you guys a sense of that. Moving on a little bit to the meat here, which is like actually writing a resolution and the road to do that. So I should say all of the resources that I'm going to share tonight, even including these lists of resolutions, are available on the AAP Collaborate site. I have in multiple points throughout this presentation, I have that linked, including a QR code that will take you directly to the online submission form. But for anyone not familiar, maybe Yolanda, you can put it in the chat. It's literally like collaborate.aap.org or something like that. Yolanda or Jamie, help me out. That is the AAP's kind of clearinghouse for all member-only sort of content of this nature. So it's different from PediaLink. It's not where you're going to find your CME, but if you've participated in different collaborative projects, if you want to know more about submitting resolutions, that is the go-to. And I do have in screenshots later on sort of what that site looks like, but just to know that all of the things, including this roadmap here and the other resources that I share, can be found on that Collaborate site. And this is meant to kind of march you through. So you have an idea for a resolution. You want to research the topic and confirm that the AAP is not already addressing it. And then you want to start working on drafting that resolution. We'll talk about some of these subsequent steps a little more, but thinking about sponsorship, acknowledging any conflicts of interest. So for example, if you're writing a resolution about formula and you have a financial stake in a formula company, that's a pretty obvious conflict of interest. Submitting the resolution, so you can see these kind of, for this first half, it might feel like that's all of the work, but that's actually the front end. And then what happens on the back end? So the resolution is reviewed by the AAP staff, who will add relevant background information. For example, if like it's a resolution about breastfeeding support, they will add anything that the section on breastfeeding has, done or commented on. It's then reviewed by the CFMC, so that committee that I'm a representative to, as well as by the senior leadership team. So all of this happens well before they're actually debated. Again, that background information is going to be added by AAP staff. So this is really helpful for you guys in terms of thinking of what you want to include as background information in your resolution, and limiting it to things that you think are really important for you to emphasize. Again, reviewed after the background information, reviewed by all those same entities again. It's then accepted for the leadership conference. So you as an author would find out about that. Skipping a couple steps in here, but then discussed at the conference and voted upon, and then it's either adopted or not, and then eventually you hear a follow-up as to the outcome. So getting started, making sure your resolution is new. I've kind of said this a couple times already, but those tend to be less successful resolutions. And by that, I don't mean that we discard them when they're submitted to us, but they tend not to be successful on the debate floor if someone's like, this resolution has been discussed, the last 5-6 years, what's different this time. So really kind of making sure that you're addressing a new issue or framing the concern that you have with an existing issue in a way that highlights what is new and different. You want to review past resolutions because obviously most of us aren't familiar with what might have been submitted in the past several years. And so there you go. This is the first of many examples where you can find that Collaborate site. It's collaborate.aap.org. You don't need to worry about the /ALF, but you do need to enter your login credentials, and then you would click on Leadership Conference to see all these resources. This is one of the most important pieces. And again, this QR code will take you to the online submission form. This is a Word document version of the template. Many folks find that helpful. I don't, it's, so it's embedded in the slides here for you to be able to look at it. When we send out the slides afterward, we can also send out the Word doc or PDF version of this, the template. A lot of people find it helpful, obviously, to kind of pre-populate before they then get to the point of entering it, because once you click in the submission form, then it's on its way. But you can see kind of the overall structure here. So the resolution, you don't have to worry about the number. That will be added by the CFMC once we have a sense of how many resolutions and in what order they were submitted. 2025 Leadership Conference, because that's the year that we're in. These, again, will be pre-populated. Your title should really be concise and reflect, again, the action of the resolution. So that one that was on the top 10 a few slides ago, AAP position on banned books, the action in the resolved was actually asking that the AAP be very clear in stating that it is opposed to the banning of books. So that title reflected. There was another one, create a task force for gender equity. Again, that was the action in the resolution, so it's reflected in the title. So you want something concise and clear. Who it is sponsored by. In the past, there used to be lots of sponsors and there would be a mad dash. Part of why we're doing this chapter chat tonight is to help get this in front of people so that they can seek district or chapter sponsorship before the deadline. But we recognized historically that this often led to a lot of back and forth and multiple circulating versions and authors actually not being clear on what was submitted. And so really just one sponsor is the request. If again, in that kind of post-submission process where the Academy and the Chapter 4 Management Committee are reviewing things, if we feel that, we should confer with another entity, we could always do that. So you don't, like, for example, if you're interested in, like a health equity topic, for example, you don't necessarily need to seek the sponsorship of the section on minority health equity inclusion and the section on, or the Council on Immigrant, Child and Family Health, and your chapter and your district and your, fill in the blank. Just really kind of aim for one sponsor. We are not stating, by the way, that those of you attending this tonight, that the district would necessarily have to be your sponsor, but we are certainly happy to and encourage you to submit your resolutions to us so we can review them as a district. But we certainly would not require that you seek district sponsorship. You can have a resolution that is unsponsored. However, if it is not sponsored, and an author can't sponsor their own resolution. So if it is not sponsored and no one asks that it be pulled from the calendar, it will not be debated on the resolution floor. So it is very, very advantageous to seek sponsorship for your resolution. Again, the date it was submitted, which will auto-populate in the online form. You don't have to worry about the disposition. That's an after the fact. The really meat that we'll get into here in a minute is the whereas and resolved clauses. But that's what that template looks like. And again, if anyone hasn't already scanned that code, I will just leave this up for just another second. You're welcome to. That'll take you to our online submission form, which even though that form also lives within the login required collaborate site, if you just scan the QR code, it should bring you to the form without requiring a login if you just want to look at it as we talk together. I have that on a later slide as well if anyone missed it. So understanding the components of a resolution. So the whereas clauses lay the foundation for your resolved. These are sort of laying the foundation for your argument. Your resolved clauses should be succinct and should represent the goal or request of the resolution. The resolved clauses should be able to stand alone. In other words, the whereases are important to position your resolution in the context in which you want people to think about it. But at the end of the day, we should be able to strip all of that away and still understand your resolution and what you are asking on the basis of the resolved clauses. And it is actually the resolved clauses that the members vote on. So when we present those on the leadership floor, everyone has had ample opportunity to review the resolution text in its entirety. It is sent out to everyone in this very large electronic packet. That is, by the way, proprietary and not to be shared outside of the Academy. But it's only the resolved that is voted on. And so this is just some snips from the online submission form, because we made quite a number of changes. So for those of you who may have submitted resolutions in the past, this actually might be the most important couple slides, because you might already be very familiar with the process. And we changed quite a bit this year to try to streamline, to increase equity, and to really just be fair and accommodate everyone. So the first of those, actually, no, this has been the case for quite some time. there is a minimum of one whereas. So you do need, for example, whereas, there's an overwhelming body of evidence that sugar sweetened beverages contribute to type 2 diabetes and childhood obesity, for example, if I was doing that sugar sweetened beverage resolution, right? You need a minimum of one whereas, but you can have a maximum of four. So you cannot have more than four whereases. And we strongly discourage sandwiching multiple different ideas together into one just to sort of meet that that maximum. Really, there should be a maximum of four different separate whereas statements. And there's no like more is not better. If you can make your argument with one whereas, that's great. Just put one in. And then, sorry, guys. And then there is a maximum of two resolves. So again, most resolutions will just have one. Some will have two. If it is submitted with more than two, the Academy staff may sort of reach out to the author to clarify, but it's equally possible that they might just strike the third. The form actually won't really let you submit a third, so you'd have to be trying to shoehorn it in. So there really have to be, and again, if you shoehorn three things together in the same text box, that will be considered being out of compliance. So two resolves. And then again, you can see here other changes. The next slide talks about the different changes for this year, but maximum of two lead authors, you have to include their name and their email, and then background information. So like I said, the Academy staff will add post hoc as an after you submit of all the relevant background that they deem relevant. So in the past, sometimes people would submit like 5 to 6 pages of background information, and a lot of it would be boilerplate, like just quoting verbatim policy statements, for example. Those are the types of things that are going to be added by Academy staff. But if you're trying to kind of highlight something unique, draw attention to something, and you feel like, for example, your clinician lens really, is picking something up that, might be missed by an Academy staff or just dumping an entire chunk of text, it's okay to say, for example, per Academy policy statement, blah, 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 on topic, blah, 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 like this is what they said in the past. So it's not that you can't include that, but just make sure you're kind of trying to highlight what particularly you're trying to get across, because if it's just to say, hey, we have these 3 policy statements, that'll be added by Academy staffers. So there's a maximum of 500 words to your background information, and there is a like a word counter in this online form, so it'll cut you off if you try to write more than 500 words. References are encouraged but not required. However, new for this year, we are limiting references to 5, and they do need to be provided in a way that is verifiable. And so the easiest way to do that is a hyperlink, because there is not a place to upload a lot of separate documents with your resolution submission. I will be totally transparent and say that in the past year in particular, there were issues with references that were not verifiable. And so we recognize that is an issue. However, some folks will submit 25 references, and that's very laborious for the Academy staff and for the CFMC to verify those. So maximum of 5, they have to be verifiable. Please do us a favor and don't expect us to go Googling. So a link that we can click to verify your reference is very helpful. And then again, a verification statement saying that all the information that you have included in the resolution, including the references, is verifiable and true to the best of your knowledge. So this, this QR code again takes you to that submission form, because it too is one of the new things for this year. So new for 2025, all the stuff I just said: limiting background information, limiting the lead authors to 2, limiting the number of references to 5, verifying references, limiting the number of sponsoring entities to 1, the online submission form itself. And then the last thing, which is you may not think is super relevant, but this comes up every year. And actually last year we had many of these that we had to disqualify, is late resolution. So there is a kind of category of late resolution, and I have that on a later slide, but historically the deadline for late resolutions was actually the first night of the leadership conference. However, the last several years, it has been actually impossible to go through all of the information that's submitted to the point that it precluded sort of reviewing the existing resolutions. And so the deadline to submit a late breaking resolution is actually July 17th, so 2 weeks before the leadership conference. And on a subsequent slide, as well as on the Collaborate site, there's more information about what would qualify. So for example, something that is equally relevant today, but I maybe didn't get around to submitting the resolution, that will not qualify. But if something happens on July 13th that you think is foundationally altering to child health and is warranting a resolution, then great. That would probably meet that threshold. But something that, for example, happened on January 21st, not going to meet that threshold, even if it's an incredibly important child health topic. Okay, moving on to some examples. So this is an example of one of our top 10 resolutions from 2024. So the AAP position on banned books. And since I kind of already talked about this, I'm going to go through this quickly. But again, a very concise title that tells you what it's about. 3 very clear whereases that are supporting the resolved. So the AAP supports children reading for growth and education, including partnering with Reach Out and Read. Reach Out and Read champions daily reading and language-rich activities for young children. Many areas of the United States have banned or challenged the reading of educational and appropriate books for children and young adults. Therefore, be it resolved that the Academy issue a statement opposing the banning of books in schools and public libraries. Very clear, no ambiguity. That's what they want. They want the Academy to issue a statement opposing the banning of books. And so that one was not only adopted, but ended up in the top 10. Here's a different one. So concise can have more words as long as all of the words are necessary. This was another top 10 resolution from the past year, another one that I referenced earlier on. So create a task force for gender equity within the AAP. Again, very clear what you're being asked from the title. 3 whereas statements that are a little longer, obviously, than the previous example, but they include relevant data or persuasive arguments. So I won't read all of those to you in the interest of time, but they kind of are making the case, laying the groundwork for why they feel this is important and relevant to the work of the Academy. So that first one is talking about the fact that pediatrics actually has the highest percentage of women physicians of any discipline in medicine. So very relevant then to the AAP, right? And then their resolves, again, are 2 in this case. So they want the Academy to create a task force for gender equity, and then they want the Academy to commit to a gender equity statement, sort of similar to its equity agenda. And then they go into a little more detail. So again, it can be a successful resolution, even if it's wordier, as long as the words are serving an intentional purpose. This is an example of a poorly written resolution, and I should just tell you I made it up. So I mentioned earlier that I am a residency program director, and so for any of you who are in med ed, the ACGME mandated some really, really substantial changes to pediatric training that take effect in July. And depending on who you talk to, it's either no big deal or the world is ending and residency should just stop because no one's going to learn how to be a doctor anymore. And so I just use that as a jumping off point for a poorly written resolution. So supporting adequacy of resident education. What does that mean? Adequate to me might mean something very different than what adequate means to you. Whereas the ACGME mandated, without providing sufficient evidence, substantial changes to residency requirements. So most of that is factual, except that without providing sufficient evidence, I've not provided anything to substantiate that they didn't provide sufficient evidence, right? So I'm making sort of like a judgmental kind of specious sort of statement without any factual basis. And then that's kind of the theme here that I'm trying to get at with some of these other whereases. So they might have to hire APPs to cover additional patients. Is that really the scope of the Academy? I don't know. It's going to unduly burden small programs and adversely affect recruitment. Those are 2 different ideas. And do we know that either of those are true? By the way, these are all arguments that have been put forth as problems with these changes. That's why I used this example. It's going to lead to insufficient experience and comfort in caring for hospitalized kids, and then they won't be ready when they graduate. Do we know any of that? Probably not. And then this last piece is kind of getting a little bit outside of the scope of the Academy, right? So first of all, these are vague. I'm including judgments and sort of value statements rather than sort of verifiable factual information. And I have too many. There's 5 of them. And then looking at the results, and this one, I use this example because this does happen a lot in otherwise well-worded resolutions, is that when you get to the resolved, what we're asking the Academy to do is outside of its scope. So the Academy informed the ACG immediately that it must reverse this requirement. We can't do that. It's not within our scope to dictate what the ACGME or what any other entity, CMS, federal government, NIH, CDC, you name it. We cannot dictate what other entities do. So that is outside of the scope. And then, asking, for example, that the other entities seek our approval before they make changes in the future is also not feasible and outside the scope of the work of the Academy. So Oh, look, I had a whole side on scope. So many resolutions ultimately are unsuccessful because of scope concerns. Year after year after year, we have great ideas, but what we're actually asking the Academy to do is outside of its scope. So the AAP works closely with many other organizations. And so just listing some alphabet soup here, all entities that are probably top of mind for many of us right now in light of the last few weeks. And I'm also not trying to be obtuse. I understand that there's many things that all of us want to advocate for, but it cannot mandate the work of those organizations. So resolutions that ask to change policy or operations of other organizations are by definition implausible and not going to be successful. Better to ask that we collaborate with another entity. So we collaborate with DHHS, for example, to really emphasize the importance of adherence to the routine childhood immunization schedule as the most evidence-based way of preventing childhood illness, right? You know, like there's a great example. So we're going to collaborate. We're going to advocate to, again, DHHS to keep picking on RFK Jr., sorry guys, that, you know, he listened to us. We're going to partner. We're going to educate. We're going to inform. And those might not feel as like oomphy as requiring or mandating, but they're going to be much more successful. And obviously, if your resolution, if the resolved is asking that the AAP do something, then you can use stronger language, but you still want to think again about that feasibility piece. So hopefully that's helpful to everyone. I do see that there's some comments in the chat, and I think we'll have plenty of time for that. So just a little more about what happens after you submit. So like I mentioned earlier, resolutions become property of the Academy and can no longer be edited by the authors. That being said, we really, as Academy leadership, and particularly as the Chapter 4 Management Committee, we really try to not make any substantial edits to content unless with extremely rare examples. We might make grammatical fixes, right? So if you hit submit and then you realize that you had some typos, like that's not the end of the world. We can fix that. That wouldn't even be considered an amendment. But we will like add in that background information. We'll verify the references. We'll again cross-reference our own, you know, we ask you to look at what's been submitted in the past. We do that as well and make sure it's not identical, you know, with no change to something that was, for example, either adopted last year or not adopted last year. If that were the case, we wouldn't like reject the resolution, but I just know that it's less likely to be successful. So there's all this stuff happening in the background. And then we also divide them up into 3 categories. So last year, the 3 categories, and this is this slight like wording change sometimes, but really the overarching categories remain the same year after year. It's really practice and related operations, advocacy and healthcare finance, which are not related to one another, but get lumped together into the same category, don't ask me why, and academy governance and operations, so different than practice governance and operations. So those are kind of the 3 buckets. And then once they're divided up into the buckets, then this is kind of, I'll get a little bit more into that, but I said I would talk about the timeline. So we're sitting here on February 19th, having this kind of overview resolution writing session. I mentioned that there is a maximum of 1 sponsoring entity. I encourage all of you, if you do have resolutions that you're either ready to submit or planning to submit, to please do submit them to us for district sponsorship, because certainly that is compelling if the largest kind of district in the country is sponsoring your resolution. But there may be, it's pretty rare, but I would say in the last couple of years, there's been like maybe 1 or 2 times where we didn't have enough of a vote for the leadership of all 4 chapters to be in agreement. And so there is a slim chance that your resolution may not receive enough votes to achieve district sponsorship. And so this is why I think it is important. This is my 2 cents, is submit it to your chapter executive director and your chapter president ahead of time. And just say, hey, I'm going to seek District 9 sponsorship, but just in case they don't agree to sponsor my resolution, I want you to have it so that I can ask for chapter sponsorship. Now, if you could do it the other way around, you could go through the district side of things first, but we as a district are not meeting to discuss resolution sponsorship until March 24th, and the firm absolute line in the sand deadline to submit the resolution is April 1st. And so this is why we recommend, if you've got it now, send it to your chapter president and even more importantly, your chapter executive director. They can kind of hold on to it. And I guarantee every single chapter, I know ours in chapter 1, which is Central and Northern California, we have a detailed timeline and a plan for how and when we're going to review these if we need to. And that way they can like be working on that in the background. And then in addition, submit it to me as the Chapter 4 Management Committee representative and say, in consideration for district sponsorship. And um, that is how I will know that you want it to be considered for district sponsorship. You can technically also submit it online and then still seek district sponsorship. It is a little cleaner if you do it the other way around. It just makes less paperwork for everyone. But if you've like already submitted, there's a number actually from Chapter 2, which is Los Angeles, that have already been submitted and they still want to be considered. So that's okay. The most important thing is if you want it to be sponsored by California, which is District 9, submit it to me. My email address is on the a later slide, and Yolanda can put it in the chat as well. Okay. Also, and it might just save everyone time if you do that in the same email, submit it to your chapter executive director and chapter president. And if you need any help knowing who those people are, Yolanda or Jamie can help you. Okay, so do that as soon as you can. Again, my kind of suggested deadline is March 1st, just to give your chapters time to plan when they're going to discuss, because they don't meet, they meet once a month, so they kind of need some lead time. But the firm deadline, if you want it to be considered for district sponsorship, if you want me to bring it to that meeting on March 24th, is to submit it by March 15th. And when I'm saying submit in this context, I mean email it to me. You could submit it online, like I said, and then that's great. The National Academy folks have it, but they won't automatically send it to me. So if you want us to discuss it as a district, send it to me. We will do that discussion on March 24th. And then we will let authors know as soon as possible afterward. The only reason that might be delayed by a day or two is if we don't have a quorum of voting members at that meeting and we have to like do that in email format. Otherwise, our goal is to really have that decision made by March 24th or 25th so that we can let all of you know and you can submit it on April 1st or before. Again, every individual author has to submit their resolution themselves. This has definitely been a point of concern in the past several years. So sending it to me to have us discuss in District 9 is not the same as submitting it. And it used to be in the past that a lot of times the committee members would like kind of send it along to national and things would squeak under the radar. They're very insistent that individual authors have to submit using the online form. So that's just important for you all to know, and I apologize for repeating myself. And then other things. So I mentioned this July 17th late resolution deadline. So again, the world keeps marching. If something really like major happens that you feel like you couldn't have reasonably known about by April 1st, by all means, you can submit a late resolution. There are some criteria on a later slide. And then if you remember, I said, there's things that happen before the leadership conference. So they get broken up into those 3 categories. And on the basis of which category they fall into, whether it's practice operations, advocacy and healthcare finance, or academy governance and operations, that dictates which of 3 virtual reference committees they're discussed in. And you as authors are invited to those. And that all happens before that official vote. So I think yes, I do. I have a slide on virtual reference committees. And hopefully this is an information overload. But this is really important because as a resolution author, if your resolution is accepted, which the vast majority are, as long as they're in by the deadline, you are invited to whichever virtual reference committee yours is assigned to. So for example, if I do one about, pure advocacy, it's going to be assigned to that advocacy and finance one. The dates of those have already been set. You guys will get these slides, but again, you can see they're on July 9th, July 15th, and July 17th. They're all at 7 p.m. Central Time, so 5 p.m. West Coast time. You will get invited. You'll get some instructions about how to log in. And what will happen is one of the committee members will present the resolution, just the resolves. The information is available so people can read the whole thing if they want to, but they will present the resolves. And then they will offer first refusal of testimony in support of the resolution to one of the authors. If you're not able to attend and you're the main author, you can designate someone else, but you have to let Jonathan Folletti, who runs this whole process, he's the AAP staffer who does this. You would have to let him know ahead of time so that he could then send the login information to your designee. And we would give you a chance to kind of talk about why you think this resolution is important and sort of contextualize it a little bit. And then there is some time for folks to give testimony in support of or in opposition to the resolutions. Because individual authors are most often not at leadership conference unless they themselves hold a leadership position like chapter officer, committee, council, section leadership. This is a really important opportunity to kind of get your voice out there about why you think your resolution is important. It's not a great idea to just grandstand and, for example, read like 2 pages of prepared remarks. Every year, a number of people do that, and it really cuts into the discussion, which is kind of the point of that virtual reference committee. So those are run by the chapter forum management committee, so folks like me. And what we do is sort of collate all of the, so like for resolution 7, whatever that 7 might be, like we had, this X minutes of discussion, and, 11 people spoke, 6 were in favor, 5 were in opposition, or whatever that, like we'll summarize all of that. There's also an online comment board that, again, you need an AAP login to be able to enter information on. There is an up and down voting feature within that comment board that, again, allows people who maybe can't come to the virtual reference committee to at least sort of say, here's why I think this is important. I want to upvote this. I think this is really important, or I want to downvote it. I disagree with it. So those are all things. And we take all of that information. We're trying to get a sense of more than just the people who are going to ultimately vote on the resolution, to kind of get a sense of how this is landing with other Academy members. So anybody with an AAP login actually can go to that comment board. So that's not just the voting members of the leadership conference. And all of that is not binding, but it is helpful to say, okay, wow, there were like 600 positive comments for this, because they'll then determine what they call, the overall agenda for how they're going to debate those at leadership conference. So every year there's probably like 20 or 30, maybe not 30, there's up to like 20-ish out of 60 that are so universally popular, that like have no negative comments. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, that they'll get put on a consent agenda, and then those are voted on in a block. So if it's on the consent agenda, nobody thinks this is going to be controversial, everybody agrees with it, it's going to be just sort of voted on as a block. So that's one of the really helpful things with that discussion board versus, oh wow, there's a lot more debate about this. Anyone can pull something from the consent agenda at the leadership conference, and then the whole resolution is discussed regardless. But I would say the most useful thing for those comment boards are to allow people to sort of make their voice heard. You as an author can see how people are feeling about your resolution, but all that discussion, it isn't binding. It's just sort of like advisory to the process. And again, we sort of assimilate all of that information, and then we do include it in our summary when we'll present a given resolution. We'll say, okay, the online discussion board had this many comments, they were largely positive, this many people spoke in their reference committee, to kind of position it before we open it up for debate. And I guess I don't have another slide on this here, but just to say, so that process happens, the resolution's adopted, let's say, and again, it's referred to the relevant entity within the AAP to weigh in on what the appropriate action would be, what action may have already been taken. That process takes a number of months. The board then again reviews that response from those relevant entities. So whether it's like, section on hospital medicine, which I'm a member of, or, committee on medical education, whatever the case may be, the board will then review those. And then those responses are communicated back out to authors, typically via the CFMC rep for their district. I've had a number of our authors from resolutions that were adopted last year asking me. We did have more resolutions than usual, a lot more debate than usual, and a lot of the changes to process were actually reflective of how much more challenged the overall process was last year. And so because of that, we actually still don't have the board response for most of the resolutions from last year. I would say that this is not typical. Usually there is a response by December, but it's important to know that, again, as an author, you're thinking like, it's adopted. What does that mean? Does that mean the AAP has to do what I said? And if so, when is that going to happen? It means that they're taking it under advisement. They're going to convene the relevant stakeholders and discuss, and then you'll hear a response. And so a resolution that gets voted on in late July, you will most likely hear a response by December. But again, we're in February and we've not heard those responses from last year. So there has definitely, and again, with, I think, the incoming administration and really having to kind of prioritize the most mission critical things for staffers to be working on, I suspect that may also be playing into the delay from last year. But just know that if it's adopted and you don't hear anything, it doesn't mean nothing happened, but it may mean it is likely going to be a matter of at least 4 to 6 months before you hear something. I said that this is really for your reference. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is just the criteria that a late resolution would have to meet. So again, that would be something that you entertained submitting between April 2nd and July 17th, why it wasn't submitted by the deadline. If an expenditure of funds is anticipated, they actually really are a little more sticklery. And then again, you can kind of see these other considerations. If it pertains to an equity issue and a historically, this is another thing I would just say generally, and this is different than sponsorship. If you're writing a resolution that's about advocacy and being really passionate and wanting to like advocate for a marginalized or historically excluded group, that's fantastic. Definitely, it's going to be more likely to be successful if you've gotten some input from some entity that like represents that group. So that might be the section on minority health, equity, and inclusion, the Council on Immigrant Child and Family Health, the Committee on Immunization, the section on, LGBT health and wellness, depending on, but it's going to be more compelling. And if it's a late resolution, they actually really will insist that you've done that. Okay, so tips for avoiding writing ineffective resolutions. I've kind of covered most of these already. This is another resource that's in that online site for you all. So already existing policy, upcoming policy. This is something sometimes authors don't know, but there's often like a policy statement that's about to come out. So sometimes the response is, this is fantastic. We totally agree with you. Our policy statement's coming out in a month. That doesn't mean that it won't get adopted. It just might mean that your response is being told that they're already working on it. Taking a position for which we already have one and have substantial existing efforts. There's these little here's are hyperlinks if you're in this online site, so you can click to those specific examples. Again, creating or promotion of existing resources, developing caregiver resources that already exist. So healthychildren.org is another place to look if you're thinking of things that might be like you're wanting to advocate for something parent facing. Again, this is more if any of you are on a national committee or in a leadership position in a council or section, you shouldn't so I'm on the committee on hospital care, so I shouldn't write a resolution saying I think the committee on hospital care should write a policy statement on, the use of child life in hospitalized children, right? Because I'm on that committee, so that would not be the appropriate way to go about that. And I number 7 here, again, I spent the most time on this in this talk because I think it's the most common thing that I see where it's outside the scope. And I would say in 95 out of 100 cases, a slight wording change from, again, tell the CMS that they should do blah, 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 to advocate to the CMS for the importance of blah, 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 could take something from outside of scope to reasonable. This is just a more detailed version of that roadmap that I don't expect any of you guys, certainly I can barely read this and I have a giant monitor. But it's again on that site that gives a lot more detail into some of those really critical steps, like how do I research the topic? How does that background post hoc review happen? What's all the behind the scenes stuff? So there's a little more detailed version of that roadmap for you to look at. And then I said I would come back to this. So if you go to that Collaborate site that hopefully by now Yolanda's put in the chat, it was on one of my earlier slides, you're going to put in your login and then you're going to click on a link that actually says Leadership Conference. So I don't have a screenshot of that, but step number 1 is, I thought I did. Maybe I put this out of, I did. I put it backwards. Sorry, this should be before the previous slide. So you go to this website here, you log in, it should bring you to this. My Collaborate site has like a jillion things because of different things. Yours is going to look different, but one of them should be Leadership Conference here. So you would click on that. That brings you to this page. And then you've got that submission form that I already mentioned. Looking for past resolutions, this is searchable, so you don't necessarily have to just like look at an exhaustive list. If it's a resolution on breastfeeding, you can type breastfeeding in. All those guidelines, all the resources that I've referenced here live in this like red section. And then this is a database of the top 10 resolutions from previous years. So sorry, those were out of order. There's more resources here again. So guidelines, form, the roadmap, the infographic, so one of these infographics is the more detailed roadmap that I already mentioned. The other one is the guidelines for writing an ineffective resolution that again has hyperlinks to examples of ineffective resolutions. This is, you guys, you may actually want to make a note if you are joining us from outside the state of California, the Chapter 4 Management Committee roster is there. So you could see, like, if you're from Nevada, for example, like what district is that? Who's my person that I would send or if you have a friend who's asking you how to, contact that person. Otherwise, for all of you, if you are members within the state of California, I'm your person. And then again, that top 10 from last year. So just wrapping up, these are really, really important and helpful resources. Again, that is my email, which is you're welcome to have and to share, whether it's because you have questions, you want to clarify things. I would say the most likely reason any of you are going to use that is that you want to submit your resolution for sponsorship. But I am happy to discuss with you. I've had quite a number sent my way already. If it looks like it's like following the parameters, my personal philosophy on this is, you're the best advocate for your own vision. So if it is following the parameters, like there's a maximum of 4 whereases, the title's reasonably clear, you don't have too many authors, you've only got 1 or 2 resolves. I am not gonna really offer a lot of material advice to change the content. If I really feel like, whoa, I totally got what you're getting at, but I think you missed the mark, then I might a little bit, and that differs, I think, a little bit from the sort of philosophical approach of our previous CFMC rep. I really feel like, while I want to give you all this guidance, I don't want you to feel like there's too many barriers and obstacles to submitting your own words, right? So if it's like, I got one the other day that had 9 whereases, 4 resolveds, and 13 references. So I told those people, like, sorry, this is, doesn't meet the parameters, but I'm not going to say, oh, when you said the wording there, you should have said it this way, because I feel like I want people to feel like they have access. And that they don't have to kind of jump over too many hurdles to submit. If you want guidance, though, if you're like, I would really love for you to read this over and give me your thoughts, then just let me know, and then I will review it with a little more attention there. So hopefully all of you have had a chance to write down my email. I'm gonna stop sharing, and let's take a look at the chat. Okay, so it's mostly Yolanda putting stuff in, so that's good. It means I was like worried there were a lot of questions. Let's see here. Okay, well, we have an MS3 at UC Davis and an SOPT rep, which is amazing. If you're still on, feel free to reach out to me. Medina, Victoria, sorry, UC Davis is also within our chapter, so Yolanda and I are a good point people for you. Yes, we will send the slides. We will also send, like I said, a file form of the submission template if you want to kind of practice, before you actually submit online. It looks like Yolanda is putting all of that in here. Any questions that folks have? Everyone's bored into sleepiness.
I don't have any questions. That was very informative. I was trying to think of what to ask, but
No, that's great.
questions. Thank you.
I just want to say I emphasize things that are different this year and rules because, well, partly, and Yolanda can tell you this, I'm a compulsive rule follower. I tell my kids, change bad rules, don't ignore them. But also, just so that you guys have all the information, I don't want you to think that it's like this really onerous thing. I really believe that it's one of the most powerful levers that we can all pull as pediatricians to get the attention of one of the largest child health advocacy groups in the world. So the rules we put into place because some people would like do things like have no references, and then some people would have like 35 and 17 pages of background, and there's a tendency, I think, to be like, oh wow, this is like a tome, it must be really great, right? And there were just some kind of inequities that had kind of existed in the process, so we're trying to make it really equitable and accessible for everyone, and not something that you're like, oh my God, I don't have a novel to write, so therefore it must not be a worthwhile idea. It could be 2 lines if it's like a compelling idea. And again, I will be out of the country for the next 2 weeks, so if somebody does yeah, Jamie's like, I appreciate the changes. Yep, me too. If anyone really wants to talk to someone, your chapter executive directors and presidents are great resources. Yolanda put all the executive director contact information in the chat there. And we also, I normally wouldn't volunteer him, but our prior CFMC rep, so the person who I took over for as of this past year, is just phenomenal and really accessible. And I'm sure if we have like a pressing question that comes up in the next couple of weeks, Yolanda or Jamie or Meredith or Tomas, so the different executive directors could connect you to him. His name is John Takayama, or even to Jonathan Folletti, who again is the AAP staffer who oversees the whole thing. So my absence for a couple of weeks shouldn't be a limiting factor. I will be like keeping track of my email, though. I just have a folder that I'm putting the resolutions in so that I make sure that we have them all ready when we discuss them in our March 24th meeting. And right after this meeting, anybody who registered will get the, or whenever Yolanda gets to it, I shouldn't like commit you to right after the meeting, everybody will get the slides. And even though we put it in the chat, we'll also send you a copy of the submission form.
Dr. Asaf, did you have another question? I know you had opened your mic, and then we do have another
That's all I
question.
wanted to ask for. Yeah, it was just for the slides. Thank you.
Okay.
And Robert asked, I am leaving on Monday. I will be gone the 24th through the 7th. So still well before that March 24th meeting where we discuss everything. And then just really quickly, unless it's a different Laura Maitosa, like shout out to Laura. Haven't seen you in so many years. I hope you're doing well. I love these like webinars because like I'll find people I haven't seen in years. Lindsay, you had a question?
Not a question, but I really just comment that this was really good and you did a great job. I think it's been really like tearing at my heart that I see a lot of mid-career physicians who are protesting something that the academy isn't doing. And I think your talk just now was just very good because it was just like from a physician's point of view, what can be done, what can't be done. And oftentimes I see on these listservs, especially everything going on internationally and globally, that physicians are feisty and just upset that the academy is not doing more. But I appreciate how you shared it, that what is the academy, what are the limitations, even from a physician point of view, as a non, like I'm not getting paid from the academy point of view. So good job. And I don't know if this is recorded just for us, not to be shared, or can be shared with other physicians that did not attend today.
Absolutely. We will have the recording of this on our website and we will send it to you and it's going to be open. Any discussion that we do have will not be recorded on there. In case I did want to ask if there were any people here that already had some ideas, but yes, all of this information can be shared with others.
Thank you, Lindsay, for all of that. And yes, I don't think we were discussing anything too salty. By the way, I'm not dissuading people from protesting or making, I think there are other ways to make your voice heard to the academy, but it's, and this isn't even a defense, because I think a lot of those feelings that those of us who are on different listservs are seeing expressed, like, we can probably relate to them. It's sort of just understanding what the levers are and how to pull them. And I think having robust debate and protesting and working with other organizations and thinking of all the other ways we can advocate is important as well. So just like respecting what's feasible is more the point, not to dissuade anyone from any ideas. Again, usually it's just a slight reframe and an idea that might not be feasible can be feasible. I am happy to stay on if folks do have like an idea they want to workshop or they just really want to quickly ask, hey, my ideas about blah, 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 has this been covered recently? I'm happy to. Otherwise, I certainly don't want to make people feel like, compelled that they have to stay past the time.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to log off, but you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Yeah, sounds great, Robert. I'm happy to stay on.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll pause the recording now or stop.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.